Elena sat at her kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold. The steam had long since disappeared, and the mug's warmth was nothing more than a memory. She didn't move to reheat it. She didn't move at all. The rain tapping lightly against the window was the only sound in the apartment, each droplet echoing like a tiny countdown to something she couldn't name. It was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. She wasn't entirely sure. The days had become indistinguishable. One endless blur of meetings, commutes, and polite conversations that never scratched the surface of anything real. She lived, technically. She worked. She breathed. She paid her bills. But it had been a long time since any of it felt like life. Her job, once a source of ambition and pride, had become a carousel of spreadsheets, performance reviews, and Zoom calls where people pretended to care more than they did. Her apartment, once decorated with hand-picked art and fresh flowers, now looked more like a waiting room. Impersonal, silent, tidy in a way that betrayed absence rather than presence. There had been no major tragedy, no dramatic betrayal, no single moment of collapse. Her life hadn't fallen apart, it had simply faded. She had faded. It was hard to pinpoint exactly when it began. Maybe it was the year she turned 35 and realized she hadn't written a song in over 2 years. Or the day she heard a child laugh on the street and couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed like that herself. Or maybe it was the morning she caught her own reflection in the elevator mirror and saw someone she didn't recognize. Someone polished, professional, and utterly vacant. Whatever the moment, the fact remained. Something inside her had gone quiet. Elena hadn't always been like this. Once she had burned with color. She had played piano in cafes, scribbled poems in journals, danced barefoot in her tiny studio apartment at 2 a.m. She used to make playlists for seasons, for moods, for people she loved. She used to dream, not for success, but for meaning, for connection, for life. But slowly, imperceptibly, life had worn her down. Deadlines, losses, compromises, a million small decisions made in the name of practicality, responsibility, survival. And in the end, she had survived, but not much more. That morning, as she stared into her mug, something strange happened. A memory surfaced, uninvited. It was her grandfather's voice, soft, weathered thick with a Romanian accent. He'd once said to her, when she was 16 and crying over a rejection from a music school, "You don't die only once, Elena. You die a little every time you stop listening to your heart." She hadn't thought about that in years. At the time, it sounded dramatic. Then it felt prophetic. She stood slowly and walked to the window. The rain had eased to a mist. The city outside looked like a watercolor, blurred, uncertain. She watched people hurrying beneath umbrellas, faces turned down, moving with that practiced urgency of people who weren't entirely sure why they were rushing anymore. She saw herself in them. Or maybe she saw what she had become. Her phone buzzed on the table behind her, a meeting reminder. She didn't move. Instead, she turned back to the table and opened the drawer where she kept old notebooks. Dusty, untouched. She flipped through one until she found a blank page. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she wrote 3 words in the center in block letters. "Am I alive?" "Ah." She stared at the question. Then she turned the page and began writing. "I wake up and feel nothing. Not sadness, not joy. Just static. I used to play music and feel things I couldn't explain. Now silence feels safer. I've become a professional at pretending I'm okay, pretending I care. I go to work and speak, but the words don't taste like mine anymore. When did I start confusing endurance with strength? When did I decide that safety was more important than meaning? When did I begin to die? Before death even asked for me?" Tears surprised her. She hadn't cried in months, maybe longer. The words were ugly, honest, necessary. They didn't fix anything, but they cracked something open. That afternoon, she skipped her meeting and walked. Aimless, no headphones, no destination. Just movement, just breath, just awareness. She wandered into the bookstore she used to frequent but hadn't stepped into in years. The bell above the door rang like an old friend's voice. The smell of paper and ink wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. She drifted through the aisles until she landed in the philosophy section. A worn paperback caught her eye. The title in bold, "A Don't Die Before Your Death," as she blinked. For a moment, she thought it was a mistake or a hallucination, but it was real. She picked it up. There was no author listed on the front, just that single sentence. She opened the first page. There are 2 kinds of death. One comes at the end, The other comes when we forget why we're alive. She sat down on the little bench in the corner of the shop and began to read. The book was more journal than manifesto. Stories, reflections, questions. One chapter asked, "What did you love when you were 10 years old? Who told you to stop? What have you lost that was never meant to be given up?" She didn't buy the book. She didn't need to. The sentence, the title, had already embedded itself into her bones. That night, she went home and dug out her old keyboard from the closet. It was dusty. She had to reconnect the power cable. Her fingers trembled as she placed them on the keys. At first, she didn't remember anything. Then muscle memory kicked in. The first notes were broken, uncertain. Then slowly a melody emerged. One she used to play when she was 19, sitting on the floor of her first apartment, barefoot and wild and believing in everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. She played until her fingers ached and her shoulders loosened. She played until the apartment didn't feel like a stranger's home anymore. She played until the silence inside her cracked and something warmer began to rise. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was something close, something like breath. That night, she slept without melatonin for the first time in weeks. The next morning, she woke up early and went for a walk. The city was still quiet. She bought a coffee from the vendor on the corner who always smiled, though she'd never smiled back until now. "Rough day?" he asked, kindly. Actually, she said, pausing, "it might be a better one." He raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's rare." He really smiled and walked away. Back at home, she opened her journal again. Below her previous entry, she wrote, "I think I've been dead inside for longer than I realized. But maybe I don't have to stay that way." She flipped to a new page and wrote, "What have I not done because I was afraid? Then, or what would I try if I knew I wouldn't fail? And finally, what might happen if I tried to come back to life? On purpose, she didn't have answers. But the questions felt like a beginning. That evening on the train home from work, she sat by the window and watched the city unfold. At the next stop, a man entered. Older, sharp suit, kind eyes. The seat beside her was empty. He sat down. There was nothing unusual about him at first glance. But as the train lurched forward, he glanced at her and said quietly, "You look like someone who's remembering how to live." Elena turned slowly. "What? You heard me?" She blinked. "Do I know you?" He shook his head. "No, but I see you." She didn't know how to respond. He continued, "Too many people die before their actual death, bury themselves in fear, in patterns, in silence. I nearly did it too." She stared at him. He didn't flinch. "Who are you?" she asked. He smiled softly. "Just someone who got tired of forgetting I was alive." At the next stop, he stood. Before he left, he placed a small card in her hand. She looked down. It read, "Don't die before your death." No name, no number, just that. As the doors closed behind him, Elena felt something stir. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. When she got home, she pinned the card to the fridge. Then she sat at her keyboard and played again. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Outside, the rain had returned. Inside, something was waking up. She didn't have a plan, no 5-year vision, no dramatic life change ready to unfold. But she had found a thread, and this time she was ready to follow it, not for perfection, not for applause, just to remember what it meant to be alive. She woke early the next morning before the alarm. The dawn light was pale and tentative, like hope stirring on the edge of memory. In the half-dark, she paused at the bedside, heart echoing in her chest. A rhythm, a sign. The world outside her window looked expectant, like it was waiting for her. She went to the keyboard again before coffee, before breakfast, before the chores that usually filled her hours with quiet obligation. This time, her fingers found new melodies, tentative, curious, honest, as if each note whispered, "Yes, you're here." She let the music grow even when it faltered, even when her chest tightened, because that falter, that squeeze, that felt real. When she finally stepped away, she carried the undercurrent of music with her throughout the day. At work, she looked at her tasks, the spreadsheets, the inboxes, and found herself resisting, not with resignation, but with a tiny spark. "I am here. I am alive." She refused another meeting invite. She said no when someone asked for her opinion and she didn't have. She said yes when someone asked if she wanted lunch. The shift wasn't seismic. No one noticed. But Elena felt the ground tremble beneath her. She came home and found the card again. "Don't die before your death," pinned to the fridge. She stared at it, then wrote in her journal. The card says I'm supposed to live, even when I didn't know I'd stopped. She tapped her pen and wrote more. I'm not sure what that means, living instead of surviving, but I want to find out. She turned to a fresh page and started jotting. 3 things I don't do because I'm scared. Sing in public. Submit my writing anywhere. Travel alone. She paused. Then, what would it take to do one of these? She closed the journal, heart pounding, not out of fear, not entirely, but something close. Possibility. She lay in bed awake until sleep came, and when it did, it felt like a gift rather than a relief. When she woke again, she made coffee. Clearly, this was becoming a ritual, and set out into the city with no plan. She wandered past storefronts, through a park, its grass still wet from early dew, the air sharp and clean, and felt her lungs fill with more than air. Possibility. Something bigger. In a small cafe she hadn't been to in years, she sat and opened her journal to that list. She ordered tea instead of coffee. Small refusal, small rebellion. She wrote, what if I submit something? Just once. No one sees it, but someone might. Then she scrawled at the bottom of the page, a day write something, anything, a something, anything. That felt real, urgent. She sketched a few lines of a short story about a woman who walks into a bookstore and finds a strange book that changes her. It wasn't inspired, it was derivative, clumsy, foot, but it existed. On the page, she pressed to save. Her heart fluttered. She left the cafe and found herself outside a bookstore, the same one, another, she wasn't sure. But entering for her had begun to feel like a step outside herself, and her voice trembled inside at the idea of silence. Someone hearing her. She shuffled through, found a shelf of local writers, pulled out a notebook, put it back, close. But then she caught a glimpse of a small poster taped to the wall. A local writer's night, sign up by Friday, the words pinned to her chest. Local, night, sign up. Not a publish, not a submit, gather, share, listen. She debated. She looked at the wall with the card's mantra in her head. She took a breath. She wrote her name on the list. She looked around. The shop smelled like paper, chance, memory. She felt a spark, fragile but bright. On Thursday morning, she shattered her routine. At work between meetings, she opened an email draft to a small local lit mic organizer. Hello, I'd like to sign up to read something at Writer's Night. Her fingers hovered. Then she hit send. She felt naked. Later that day, she checked the lunch line at the cafe and caught her reflection. A woman with a sharp breath, a soft jaw, a pulse, a presence. When she got home, she practiced reading just a bit of her short piece into the mirror. Her voice stuttered, but she kept going. She learned more in the way her voice caught, the way her mouth opened to words than in all the silence prior. She went to the keyboard afterward and composed a new tune, calmer, smoother, one that felt like gratitude rather than survival. Its melody trailed off like her breath after a laugh. Beautifully unfinished. Friday, she woke with a bird's rhythm in her chest. She went to work, did her tasks, though her thoughts kept drifting. Tonight, I'm doing it. She pledged to herself to arrive early at the venue. After work, she changed into clothes that felt like her. Simple, not a put together, not a safe. She packed her journal, the story, and the card. She walked to the cafe near the bookstore where the reading was to be held. The streetlights glowed like fireflies above her steps. Inside, she found a small crowd, writers and listeners, warm with when we begin jitters. A mic stood at the front. Chairs were mismatched. The air smelled like coffee and possibility. Could she do this? Names were called. People read poems, flash fiction, essays, many pieces about grief, hope, small awakenings. Listeners nodded. A woman closed her eyes at a line. A man nodded while reading. When it came to Elena's turn, her heart roared. She stepped forward, breath gone, and returned. Her voice cracked as she read. Just the first few lines. A woman seeing her own reflection in a store window and realizing she's been fading. She stopped. The room filled with that quiet, that attention. She took a breath. Continued. She stumbled, regained. Sentences wavered, but the words reached. When she finished, she closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was silence, and then applause. Gentle, sincere, something in her chest broke open. After a man who'd read before approached her. "That was beautiful," he said. "Thank you for sharing." A writer whose piece had been sharp with loss said, "That took courage." She nodded, voice thick. "Thank you. I feel different." Walking home, night air cool on her face, she thought, different is real. At home, she pinned a new line to the wall next to the card. I spoke. And it changed something. She sat at the keyboard a while before sleep. Nothing deliberate, just presence. Just strings of notes, familiar, forgiving, alive. Saturday morning, she sat with her journal in the sunlit corner of her apartment. She reviewed the pages, her questions, her fears, the list, then wrote, "Well, I have taken steps. I am beginning to live for real, not just breathe." She added a new list. What would I try next? Sing in public, travel alone for a weekend, submit writing to a small journal. Beside each tiny checkboxes, but none ticked yet. She smiled at the blankness, because blanks are unmade, open, invitation. On a whim, she applied to one online literary journal. A no guts, no glory, she scribbled beside. Click, submit, her heart loud in her ears. Then she booked a solo getaway, a small beach town 2 hours away. 3 nights, 1 suitcase, just her and sand and whoever she became there. Flush with that, she turned to the keyboard and played music shaped by brine and horizon, distant seagulls in memory, open spaces. The melody curved outward, reaching. She fell asleep with a full heart. Sunday morning, she woke at dawn. The sun striped her walls. She packed the car bag. She looked at the card on the fridge. "Don't die before your death," she whispered to it. "I'm trying." She walked to the window. The city hushed. She closed her eyes. There was no grand transformation, but something in her had changed the shape of its corners. Her life wasn't a fix. It was unfolding. She was opening. She had discovered, maybe rediscovered, that life isn't only what happens to you. It's what you choose to touch, what you choose to break through. The keyboard had given her songs again. The journal had uncovered questions. The card had given her a command. The reading had reminded her voice mattered. But more than that, she had discovered herself. Not the woman lost in routine, the one who faded. The one who might live only through small, brave steps. She packed. She walked out, not knowing what came next, but rooted in the promise that she would keep going. Because starting, resisting, fading, feeling was its own resurrection. Morning arrived soft and golden, filtering through closed curtains to drape the room in warmth. Elena stirred before her alarm, the music of life rising in her blood, insistent and quiet. She sat up, breathing it in, the faint hum of possibility in every inhale. She walked to the keyboard, familiar now as an extension of herself. Her fingers brushed the keys, hesitant at first, then confident. She played a melody born from memory and longing, an old refrain reworked into something new, each note a promise. The music rose, gentle but urgent, as if the world had been waiting for it. The melody faded, but the feeling lingered, soft and alive. She sank into her chair, heart full, and let herself sit in that space before the day began. Over breakfast, she scribbled in her journal. This is where the turning happens, where living becomes movement, not inertia. Her words pulsed with urgency. She paused, pen hovering over the page, feeling the fragility and resolve in that line. She turned the page and wrote, Below it, she made a list, bold and alive. Share my story in full with someone holy. Stand by the ocean again barefoot. Write a letter to the woman I was at 20 to thank her. Each entry felt heavy with weight and light with possibility. Later that morning, she headed out, the list tucked into her bag like a roadmap. She walked without GPS, guided by impulse, through neighborhoods that thrummed, older brick buildings, vibrant murals, voices echoing in alleyways. The world looked different. Not in appearance, but in invitation. Yeah. She passed a small gallery she'd never noticed. Inside, a single photograph captured her. Literally, not her, but a woman leaning over the ocean, hair wild, eyes fierce. It was titled "A Before You DA." She stepped closer, transfixed. The caption read, "A local photographer's tribute to stories untold, moments almost lost." Her breath brushed against possibility's throat. She wrote the photographer's name in her notes and left, heart racing. At home, she carried the photo's pulse inside her. She brewed tea and sat at her desk. She opened her laptop and began to write, not the short piece she'd read aloud, but something deeper, longer. A letter to her younger self, the one who had burned with color and belief. The words poured. "A dear Elena at 20, you are alive in every trembling breath I take now. You sent me music, stories, hope, gifts I almost lost. I write to thank you and to tell you I am waking again. I'm writing this so you know your fire never died. Love, Elena at 36. She paused, tears warm on her cheeks. She read it aloud, then reread. The letter sat between two versions of herself, bridge and offering. That afternoon, she texted the photographer, "Your photo. It spoke to me. Can we meet?" I'd like to talk about it. She pressed send with trembling courage. She filled the rest of the day with gentle activity, music flowing from the keyboard, then the journal, song notes curled into the margin of her letter. She rehearsed saying, "I am alive again," into the mirror until the words didn't hurt. Evening arrived calm but charged. The reply arrived, "Yes." Coffee tomorrow afternoon. Elena exhaled fully. The world exhaled with her. She lit a candle, played the melody again, softer now, more of gratitude than protest. She closed her eyes as the final chord lingered. The next day, she met the photographer, a woman with a quiet presence and eyes that saw. They walked together beside the river, conversation branching and deepening. The photographer spoke of capturing moments of awakening, people rediscovering themselves, unfreezing after long winters. Elena listened, and for the first time didn't feel invisible. In a cafe bathed in afternoon light, the photographer showed Elena more work. Portraits of others in mid-turn, caught in reflective moments. Eyes open, breath returned, stories just starting again. "When did you come alive?" the photographer asked softly. Elena thought, "A day, but not only today. Yesterday and the day before and the ones before that, all the small selves that fought to come back." The photographer nodded. "That's what I try to capture." They walked off with new purpose, friendship rooted in mutual witness. Back at her apartment, Elena pressed her letter to the fridge, next to the card, side by side. "Don't die before your death, dear Elena," at 20. She tapped her fingers on the fridge. She used to live in boxes. Now her fridge carried her becoming. That night, she packed for the weekend getaway she'd planned, the one where ocean would meet her again. Sitting on her bed in the hazy lamplight, she wrote one more line in her journal, not because it's easy, but because it matters. Before sleep, an inflection shifted inside her, hope lightened by conscious movement, not by forgetting the fall. Early Saturday, she drove. The highway stretched toward shore, lane lines becoming waves. Her heart matched the rhythm of the road. She arrived as twilight melted into dusk, pink and deep blue smeared across horizon. She stepped onto the sand, bare feet, cold water lapping. She looked out at the ocean, that immense mirror, and felt small, not in fear, but in connection. Breath filling long-forgotten spaces. She walked into the water until it curled around her ankles. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I am alive." The ocean, patient and present, welcomed her. That evening, she returned to the shore edge. The moon was stealing across waves. She sat on the sand, journal in lap. She wrote, "I was given water again. Life returns in movement, in witnessing, in saying yes to the world and to myself." She turned to her music notes, scratched down on scraps of paper, and hummed a tune to the sea. A woman appeared, a beachcomber gathering heart-shaped stones. She smiled. "A beautiful song," she said when Elena hummed the last phrase. Elena blushed, voice quiet. "Thank you. It's new to me." The beachcomber nodded. "Keep going." Elena nodded back. Something swelled inside, affirmation. "Keep going." She spent the rest of the trip writing, walking, sounding the edges of silence with music. She left tracks, not perfect, not planned, but hers. On the car ride home, she turned toward the city lights. The horizon behind her was the ocean, vast and honest. In the rear view, her footprints shimmered tiny arcs on dark sand. Inside, Elena carried the echoes of waves and possibility. The chapter of discovery had begun's end, the threshold of something even bigger.